Very much. Okay, Shavua Tov to everybody. Good morning. So today we have the following that we're going to discuss. In the beginning of this year, we're going to go into the Petira of Moshe Ornstein. We'll discuss some of his teachings, some minhagim relevant to Levayas. And we're going to talk about Purim Katan, which is this Monday night. The minhagim, the laws and customs relevant. And then we're going within the women's course. I cited last week that we would be using as their reference, as our guideline, the Sefer Halichas Pasi Yisrael, Rabbi Fuchs. I noticed, however, that he actually doesn't discuss, at least I did not find any discussion, on tzitzis and tefillin in his book, just assuming that women don't wear it, so there's no need to discuss anything about it. But we will be discussing a number of points that have relevance towards women. So only after we get through that we will begin inside of the Seder of in the Sefer. So last night, as we know, here in Tzfas passed away with Moshe Mordechai Ornstein, who was the mashpia, the head mashpia here of the yeshiva. I was married to be a student of his, a mushpa of his. For a period of time, he was my personal mashpia for about a year, maybe a year plus, when I was learning here in the yeshiva. And it's interesting, one of the minhagim, the customs of, by the passing of an individual, it's brought in the Gemara in Moed Katan and recorded in ShulchanAruch. There's a whole chapter on it in Yeridea, which is eulogies. And the Gemara says there, and it's brought down in the ShulchanAruch as Halacha, the importance and obligation of eulogizing a person. It's not very good. I don't like quoting negative things, but I'll just leave it at that. It doesn't quote a very nice thing. With that said, it is customary among some communities, including Chabad, that we do not say hespeden. We do not eulogize. Accordingly, we have one of the most modest ceremonies for a funeral that exists in Jewish custom, in Jewish tradition. One of the main bulks of the funeral is the speeches, the eulogies given, hespeden. And being that we do not say any hespeden at all, so the vast majority of the entire process or procedure or procession of a funeral is cut out. In other sects of Jewry, they follow the basic halacha till today, and they give eulogies. And as we said, they are required to. That's the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. You have to eulogize a person, and if you don't eulogize, is a very severe punishment brought down. So what's the basis of the minhag Chabad not to eulogize? Is this a good custom? I mean, obviously it's a good custom. Every custom has a root in Judaism. What's its root? Why do we do it? And can one bypass it?
Can you explain again what eulogize means? Doesn't it mean
A eulogy means so it's like this. A eulogy in halacha means that you speak about the deceased, you speak about his good deeds or his potential good deeds, meaning what he was capable of doing were he to still be alive, what he would have done if he would have had the ability, his actual good deeds with slight exaggeration. And for the purpose of making people very simply feel torn and brokenhearted by his passing. And so back in the day, eulogies was a profession. You wouldn't just get up and give a eulogy just because you know the guy, or just because it's your relative. You would hire a eulogizer, which went to eulogizing college. He took a course in eulogizing, and he would know how to, or he would be a great orator, know how to bring from Chazal, and then learn a little bit about the family, about the person, and all, all tie it in until by the time he was done, a good eulogizer, everybody was crying away. Nobody was able to contain themselves. That was a professional eulogizer. In fact, it is a chiyuv upon the sons to hire a eulogizer for this sake. I don't know. I haven't heard of in today's times, and I talk about today's times, the last 30 years, that this is still in custom, that you have paid eulogizers. But I do know, for maybe someone can share with me. Does anybody know?
That's not in Judaism that you're talking about. Or you were talking
Of course, I'm talking about Judaism. I'm talking about the Gemara. I'm talking about ShulchanAruch. It says the sons have to even hire a eulogizer. If they don't have anyone to do it for free, they have to pay someone
I've never heard of
to
it.
eulogize. So today, this area of profession has become extinct, for the best of my knowledge. I have not heard of. I haven't seen any website that a person sells himself as a eulogizer. You know, you can pay me. I take $150 an hour to eulogize, plus preparation fees. But back in the day, this was a very big profession, and I know for a fact that it was around less than 100 years ago, because there's a sefer that was printed in New York in the early 1900s by a famous eulogizer then, and he wrote 50. He passed away, I think, in 1950. It was a book that he wrote before he passed away of 50 sermons that he gave when he was hired to eulogize. So this was still around. He was paid, and you read it. I read through his eulogies. It's unbelievable. These are people who he doesn't know who they are. You know, they're not family, they're not friends. They hired him to do the job. So he would write how to do it. He would do research on the family, research on the person, how much to exaggerate to one level, in what area to exaggerate, what to say. It was a whole field of study.
Isn't the whole idea, to be honest?
So the halacha says that it's permitted to slightly exaggerate, as we assume if this individual had the capability. Let's say he gave $100 tzedakah. So you say this person was a big baal tzedakah. Instead of saying he gave $100, you can say he gave $200, because if he would have had $200, he probably would have given $200. But to say that this person, you know, gave millions of dollars to charity when the person was a pauper his whole life, you know, obviously it's a lie, and that's forbidden to say.
Right.
It's forbidden to over-exaggerate, but to slightly exaggerate by eulogy is permitted according to halacha. But because of this reason, because of this issue where you're given slight flexibility in the exaggeration but cannot over-exaggerate, that's what created a custom amongst Chabad and other communities to never eulogize. Why? Because it says that it's not only is it forbidden to over-eulogize, but it's also damaging onto the deceased.
Oh, wow.
When a person over-exaggerates and says things that aren't accurate or true about the deceased, it says the deceased is listening throughout the entire time. He's by the eulogy, he hears everything everybody has to say. When you ask him for mechilas, as is the custom, he hears you, and he can answer back not in a wavelength that we can hear, but he is hearing, and he's very much alive at his funeral and after, throughout the 7 days of Shiva. And therefore, when a person eulogizes him, he hears these things. He hears, just like we're alive now in hearing. He's alive, just not in his body, but he's hearing. And he hears all these people saying all these things that may not be accurate, and he feels very bad. Not only did he have to pass away, but now he has to think about all the things he should have and could have done and what he fooled people to think he did. Furthermore, the Satan, the Malach HaMavis, he doesn't just kill the mace and move on with life. He stays. He escorts him. So he stays there by the Flavaya, he stays there throughout the eulogies, and he hears all these things. And when he hears all these things, he says, okay, I'm going to bring it upstairs and we're going to check it out. And if they find it's not accurate, they can hold a dinu mishpah to the neshama. This is all written in sources in Nigla. And because of this great severity, the custom in Chabad is not to eulogize. We don't want to take a chance of overstepping the accuracy of what this individual was. And therefore, even by tzaddikim, we don't give you. Even by the Rebbe had not one eulogy.
I don't think you need
The Rebbe Rayatz, right, it said by tzaddikim you can't even eulogize. No words can say. That's because it's above eulogy. But in any event, the idea is that the minhag Chabad is that we don't, and therefore there's no chiyuv to do so, because the mace himself doesn't want it. If the mace belonged to, if he was a Chabad chassid, he wants to follow the custom, and he doesn't want anybody to eulogize him, and you have to mitzvah, the shmeila divrei hameis, it's a mitzvah to follow the words of the deceased, and if he commands not to be eulogized, you obviously do not have an obligation in such a case to eulogize him, and that is why the Chabad custom is we do not give eulogies. This would apply in two areas. if somebody who is not a Lubavitcher passed away, you say, well, he's not a Lubavitcher, he practices eulogies, I'll eulogize him. But you have to be very careful because you can't over-exaggerate, and we're very careful regarding the exaggeration. So that's still a reason to abstain. Even if somebody says, well, I'm not a Lubavitcher, I don't follow this minhag, I follow the halacha, so even though this relative of mine is a Lubavitcher, I'm going to eulogize. He says, no, because he does not want you to do so. He followed that custom. It is not good for his neshama for you to do so. It is against his will. Similarly, we find on a day that Tachanun isn't said, such as this coming Tuesday and Wednesday, Tachanun isn't said on Purim Katan. Discuss that later. 2 days, yeah, we'll discuss that.
Okay.
So, on all days that Tachanun isn't said, eulogies are also prohibited. Now, you have people, it's a very sensitive time, obviously. A funeral, the relatives, the children, the brothers of the deceased are parting, with this relative, and the heart is filled with emotion and they want to be able to express it. So it's a very sensitive time. And giving a eulogy and saying last words is viewed by them, by relatives, as very therapeutic. And so therefore there's a great will to do so. But there's certain days in which it is forbidden for anyone to eulogize, such as days the Tachanun isn't said. And in these situations, all Klal Yisrael, we don't eulogize. But Moshe Feinstein passed away Yud Gimel Adar Rishon. His Yahrzeit is coming up. And there was a big debate what to do, because his burial took place in Har Menuchos on Yud Dalid on Purim Katan. And since he was the Gadol Adar, the Pesach Adar, a special heter was given to allow eulogies to take place. But in general, no eulogies take place on days that Tachanun aren't said, and there too, it's damaging to the neshama. A person, even as difficult as the time is, a person has to stay level-headed and understand our purpose now is to do everything in benefit for the mace, for the deceased. It's not about us, it's about him. So giving a eulogy at this time, when he's listening, is not beneficial for him, so we abstain. And therefore, that which is today, a lot of people, even in Chabad, and even on days that we're not allowed to give eulogies, they came up with a new term. Instead of calling it a eulogy, we'll call it divrei preda, farewell words. But in essence, it's the same thing. They go ahead, they first start with the Dvar Torah, and then they start entering about the mace. So you're saying a eulogy. Changing the name does not change the content. And therefore, doing so is forbidden. Once somebody told Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, on one of these days, Tachanun, and said that he plans on not giving a eulogy, just giving parting words. He said, what do you mean parting words? What do you plan on saying? I'm going to say a little, that we're going to miss him. And they said, that's a eulogy that you can't say. Changing what you're calling it doesn't change what it is. So therefore, that also should not be done. And the custom is we literally do not say anything. And that helps the neshama to rest in peace. With that said, after the Rebbe Rayatz passed away, Yud Shvat, Tafshin Yud, as per Chabad custom, of course, no eulogies were given, but during the Shiva, we don't give eulogies not just on the day of the funeral, even afterwards. But during the Shiva, the Rebbe received a letter from a chassid saying that even though eulogies we don't give, we do say stories and teachings. It's mutter to repeat a story or a teaching to avoid emphasizing, to embellish the greatness of the individual, and really more focus on the content of what they said or stories that happened with them. And the Rebbe, during the Shiva, the Rebbe Rayatz said a number of stories of the Rebbe Rayatz. So getting so this year is the Ilui Nishmas of Moshe Mordechai ben Avraham. Today is his first day of Shiva. He was a very unique mashpia. Again, this is not a eulogy, this is for us to learn from the different things that he taught, and I personally was a witness to as a mushpa of his. He came from a Litvish background. He went to the yeshiva called Chemed, in the Yishuv Chemed, and he became, in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a lot of people who learned in Litvish yeshivas, big Litvish yeshivas, Panovich or Chemed, his yeshiva. Other yeshivas were brought to Fabregens in Kfar Chabad yeshiva. You had a number of first of all, there were a number of Lubavitcher Chassidim who learned in other yeshivas. Not all Lubavitchers learned in Tomchei Tmimim. The Landau family kids all learned in other yeshivas for a number of years. They learned in Panovich. And also, many were from Litvish backgrounds, and they learned in Litvish yeshivas, being from Litvish backgrounds, but they became interested in going to a Fabregan, and in that time, the main mashpia was Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. He himself came from a Polish Hasidic dynasty background, and he became a Chabad Chassid and was a very, very special Jew. He was a real Oived Hashem.
Like, books?
No. Shlomo Chaim Kesselman didn't write any Svarim, but as it says, his words are as Svarim. He left one of the largest and greatest legacies of students that we can boast of today in Lubavitch. He had a power a captivating power that was not seen by any other mashpia of his day, and people would come and become enraptured in his fabregans, and they saw the truthness of his dedication and the true words that he spoke in Avodas Hashem. He was old style Chabad. What does that mean, old style Chabad? I hate to say that, because old style Chabad should be new style Chabad. There should be no difference. It shouldn't be old style. It has to all remain the same. The tradition has to be the same. But nonetheless, I say this because from the outside perspective, we don't always view it the same. If you ask in the world, what is Chabad? Some people tell you, it's a humanitarian group. They help people when there's humanitarian crises. That's some people's perspective of what is Chabad. Other people say, they go out and they be Makarav Yid and they start Chabad houses. There's many different perspectives of what Chabad is. The original, initial, which should remain till today, perspective of Chabad is a Jew who is an Oived Hashem, who is a server of God, between him and God, and he works on himself, he works on his character, he works on his Avodah, for the sake of serving Hashem, per the teachings of Tanya. That is originally and will always remain as Chabad. And this is how Reb Shlomo Chaim would bring up his students. The idea of eskafia, where you abstain from indulging in unnecessary things, was very much on the forefront always of Chabad philosophy, Chabad practice, and of his teachings, of Reb Shlomo Chaim's teachings.
He started that teaching?
No, he continued it.
Oh, wow.
But
he
this
made
is...
it, for us to
he spoke... Listen, there's many things written in the books. You'll find that, look at this library right here, how many books we have. We have here over 1,000 books. Now, if you want to go into the library that contains almost all books ever written, you'll have about, 300,000 Jewish books written. It's one thing to be an expert in the books and open up the books and read something in the books and then take it into practice. They're two very different ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of things that we may be reading in the books, we view them as abstract, theoretical, or sometimes even a history lesson. This is back then. This is history. This isn't really something today. Today we're different. Today it's about, today is shlichus, today is going out miftzayim, today is all these other things. We're learning history about what Chabad used to be. Chas v'shalom. So, but because of this, sometimes things get swallowed away. For example, the emphasis on person's refinement of his personal character, a person's refinement of bein adam lechaverei, a person's avodas hatfilah, a person's working on his avas Hashem. Sometimes these things get swallowed amongst many of the other initiatives that we, and especially the Rebbe, spoke about, which are, of course, we follow as Chassidim, but they get swallowed away as if that now that belongs to the yesterday and is no longer relevant for today. But Reb Shlomo Chaim was the type of mashpia that he wouldn't have, his fabregans weren't speeches. He wouldn't give a speech, as a lot of fabregans have come into today for one reason or another. It was often repetition. It was almost always repetitive of the same points, maybe in different ways, in different mishalim, but giving over the same points of being mechazik, the mishpaim, the students, to work on themselves and work on a real personal avodah between themselves and their Creator, as Avodas Chabad always was. So he created many of these style of students. One of them is Chaim Shalom Deutsch in Yerushalayim, famous mashpia in Yerushalayim, Chaim Shalom Deutsch. Another one of his is Reb Slavatitsky from Antwerp. And another one was Rav Moshe Mordechai Arnstein. He was another one of his Talmidim, very close Talmidim of Shlomo Chaim, that really, you can say, nurtured and became saturated with this type of avodah. And anyone who went around and has heard and spoken to different mashpiyim, it was something, and especially by Fabregans, it was something you picked up on the dot. You picked it up right away. This is a student of Shlomo Chaim. the way he spoke, the messages transmitted, you would right away tell that, this is someone who filled himself with the oil of Shlomo Chaim Kesselman, which is, as I said before, the way Chabad always was and will remain to be, but needs to be emphasized more. So in his Fabregens, he would so Shlomo Chaim was not scared of giving Musar, in Chabad way, but he wasn't scared of giving Musar. He would, if he needed to give someone Musar, he would say Musar. He would give it as it is. He would be straight. Obviously not to embarrass someone, but in a way that it would be, in his shikul adas, in his balancing and understanding, in a way that this individual can accept it. He wouldn't beat around the bush, and he wouldn't, just give general speeches, but it would be a very close relationship. It would be a very, straight, demanding of a student, and he would be very, he would go into and discuss with them at private, even though forbidden, what are they doing, and what are even simple things of challenges that they may be having, and work with them in a very person-to-person basis. And so this is the type of mashpia that he was, continuing that, also Moshe Mordechai, of continuing that legacy, which is, as I said, we shouldn't say legacy, this is the legacy of Chabad. Chabad is and always will remain to be the Avodah of Tanya, service of the Creator, refining one's character. A person's refining his Bein Adam L'Chaverei, his Avos Yisrael, being very meticulous and calculative with what he's done and what he hasn't done, doing a cheshbon nefesh, being a very true Jew, not feeling any haughtiness or arrogance. And of course, in addition, in our generation, we also do miftzayim and we also do shlichus, but none of that is in place. Chabad has not taken a new code, a new garment, and that is false. It's taken an additional garment, not a new one. The Rebbe once emphasized this in a sikha in the Tafshin Lamets. There were people who were saying then, after when Miftzat Tefillin came out in Tafshin Chav Zayin, so people were saying that now a new generation has become, has evolved in Lubavitch, and instead of having the main focus be on deep intellectual thought of Hasidic teachings and lengthy times of prayer where a person works on his character and emotions, now we're more the generation of action. So we daven 40-minute davenings, quick to the point, like everyone else, sometimes even worse. And, we're a new generation, a Dor Chadash. And our main focus now is Miftzayim and Shlichus, and the Rebbe dedicated a whole sikha to this, and he was very hurt by this false inference, and says that everything that I say is in addition to, of course, to all of the upstanding fundamentals of Chabad Chassidism, and nothing has changed here. This has to always remain as the original of Avodas HaTefillah and these things. And while we, of course, adapt new things and different things based on the Nasi, this is not in place of that. So this is something that he would speak about all the time, and again, not to eulogize, but just to emphasize the idea of of what he taught, that when we read about the Avodah of Chabad in Tanya or in any other sefer, we should never view it, chas v'shalom, as a history book of what people used to do. It's relevant till today. It's demanded till today. Of course, Neskatnu Ameichem, we're in a lower generation, so things are more difficult to achieve. But we can't have the attitude to believe that as if, this is no longer applicable today, chas v'shalom.
Can I ask a question about him? I understood that he's 40 years in the Chabad Yeshiva. Is that correct?
I believe so, because he began in Tafshin Mem, so it's almost 40 years.
20s, right, when he started?
He was passed away 67, yeah. I guess it was 25, 27, yeah. As the style of Reb Shlomo Chaim, as I said, being inclusive of some necessary musar when they would speak to you. So a lot of his mushpoim, Chaim, including Moshe Mordechai, also took this approach, and so all the other mashpim in the yeshiva till today, they're very open, very smiling. Like you can feel very very open to go over to him and talk to him. And you feel that it's basically like a therapist. There's no one's putting you on the line. No one's going to call you out on anything. It's just having someone to talk to, B'Eved Hashem. But in the path of Shlomo Chaim, it wasn't that way. And he, as a student of his, also practiced this. Where I remember my first meeting with him as the official coronation of the Mashpia Mushba relationship. So he sat down with me and literally analyzed my entire day. And I got a lot of musar of that hour, discussion. What is this? What is going on? It was a very stern And but again, this is something that polishes people, that gets people to be where they're supposed to be. And I'll just mention one more thing. In a private conversation, he once told me that one of the things that he's very, there were a lot of things that he would speak out about that, other people either Bechlal didn't even know, didn't believe in, were not in that realm, or were too intimidated to ever bring up. But one of the things he spoke about, I remember he was telling me, is that I was speaking to him about, because I also come from a Litvish background, so I speak to him, and he also does speak to him about, what causes a lot of times a lot of his snagdas opposition to the path of Hasidism. And because let's call a spade. I mean, there is, or at least was, back then in 2000, a lot, to a tremendously greater quality of opposition, and there was a lot of machlekes. And this is not something new. This dated back to the times of the Gra. It took a peaceful turn for about 100 years until the machlekes re-erupted in the late 80s and 90s, etc. So, of course, every camp blames the other camp. They're at fault for the eruption of the dispute or the eruption of the. But in general, there's always two sides, and there's always. So one of the things he said that he felt that was very, very wrong and very damaging, and it's not the derech of Chabad, and was never the derech of Chabad, is how you hear people speak about other gedolim. That's what he told me. When I heard this, I was kind of shocked, because, in every group, it's very common for you to, embellish your leader, your gadol, and at times even put down others. It's very common in many groups, unfortunately.
That's a big sin.
One second. First, let's talk about what's done. Then we can talk about what the sin is. So this is, very common. The idea of embellishing your own Rav, or even considering him the leader of the generation, your own Rebbe, Daily Yisrael, and other holy Jews out there, is already a step. But not everyone is there. People who aren't affiliated with any one specific group, so they're everyone's chassidim. They're no one's chassidim. They can hold everyone's holy and everyone's good. But someone who is directly related, to one specific group, it's difficult. There's an emotional challenge to give room to anyone else that's not following your path, because you believe, as being a Belzer, as being a Chabadsker, as being a Breslover, as being a Litvisher, as being a Sephardi Talmud of Rav Avadia, that this is the path, and I'm racing, and they're basically crippled. No one's really making it except me. And we find this type of attitude recorded in the Sichos as well. Rebbe Rayatz describing something very interesting. Rebbe Rayatz was describing to the Rebbe in a letter one of the differences between Chabad Chassidic philosophy and other Polish groups in terms of character. And there he brought a whole story, and he explained the following, that by other Polish Chassidic groups, I don't know how much this is true today in our generation, but definitely originally this was correct, and we have a lot of other external documentation to prove this point of the Rebbe Rayatz, that the Chassidic groups of each individual Chassidic group felt that their Rebbe was the Nasi Adar, Gadol Adar, and that the other Rebbes were basically just like rebels. They were basically not real tzaddikim. This was an unfortunate attitude that a lot of them had. The Rebbe Ratz brings a story where there were a few Polish Chassidim together with a known Chabad Chassid in the times of, I believe, the Tzemach Tzedek, that were convening together and discussing their Rebbe and different miracles. And when each one of these Chassidim spoke about his Rebbe, he also added something to put down about the other Rebbe. It wasn't enough to put up his, he had to put down the other as well. And this Chabad Chassid answered them that by us, and this is what the Rebbe Yatz says in the Sikha, by us Chabad Chassidus, we are okay, we are fine with the fact that you also have tzaddikim, and that you also have very righteous people, but we hold precious what's living at tzaddik, and we don't have to nullify other people's. And so this idea can sometimes get lost with all the hyperbole and the great emotion of attachment and iskashas the person wants to have, where he can then use it to put down chas v'shalom other leaders of jury. So first of all, number one, the idea of putting down other Gedolei Yisrael is for sure against halacha. It's completely asur. And just because First, number one, they are someone representing Torah, someone representing Torah learning, and even if they make mistakes, in our opinion, it's not a reason to disrespect what they stand for. It's not a reason to disrespect them. Forget about PR. Right now we're talking from a halachic perspective. It's public relations. I'll get to public relations soon. First, I'm talking about purely halachic, what is demanded from a Jew between him and himself. And this would go even in a person's mind. We find this started with the Alte Rebbe. The Alte Rebbe warned Chassidim they shouldn't dare speak badly against the Gra. They shouldn't dare speak badly against the Gedolei and Talmidei Chacham, the Misnagdim. They shouldn't dare open their mouths against them. We read this letter once in one of our classes. It's a letter from the Alte Rebbe. He penned the letter to the Chassidim, being very, very careful of not to speak badly about anyone else, especially against the Talmidei Chachamim, as this Torah and Kedusha in other places as well. No one has a monopoly over Torah and Kedusha. The monopoly is to all Klal Yisrael. Torah Tziva Monu Moshe Meirasha Kilas Yaakov. The entire Kilas Yaakov has a Meirasha. So no one has a monopoly of Torah and Klal Yisrael, of Torah and Kedusha. Now, there's different methods of serving Hashem, and obviously there's nothing wrong with someone believes in everybody, and we feel for ourselves that this is the best method, Chas v'shalom, to put down another group or another individual, and this was the Rebbe's approach as well. The Rebbe's approach was always each according to their minhag, the Harana of Shati, everyone should do according to their custom, according to their tradition, and not impose a change or a belittlement in anyone else. And even Gedolei Yisrael, who didn't agree with the Rebbe on certain things, the Rebbe very much respected them and had tremendous honor for them as people. And even in some of the most emotionally touched battles that the Rebbe fought, the Rebbe always made sure to honor and respect them. When Lord Jacobson, I think Judge Kobowitz from England, when Lord Jacobowitz from England came out with, his psak that you have to return land of Israel for the sake of peace, which of course we know led to tremendous bloodshed, and the Rebbe came out vehemently against it, as against halacha and being an incorrect psak. But in the correspondence, Rebbe had tremendous respect for him. Rebbe called him tremendous respect. And when he was told that Kiviyachol, there were some people who threw eggs at him when he came to New York, he said, I don't believe it was my Chassidim. I would never allow for such a thing. I have the tremendous respect for you, despite your opinion. So this is something that, Bichlal, in general, that Chabad always emphasizes, not always in practice, but it's something that has to be in practice. So in other words, if somebody, I'll just give an example. So if we mention the name of Rav Yashiv, so even though he was a famous Litvish Paisik and didn't always rule and say things that were to the spirit of the Chassidim, nonetheless, we separate that from his greatness of Torah, and we respect him as an individual. You have some people who allow themselves, their tongues, to negate and put down others, even the Gedolei Yisrael of other sects, because they were misnagdim. Sometimes people do this with the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was a famous, great, tremendous Goin living in Bnei Brak, and he was a Goin, a tremendous master of Torah.
Got confused, yeah.
And so I once heard someone mention his name in a derogatory manner. I told him, the chutzpah, how can you say such a thing? How can you say such a thing? He said, what do you mean? You know, he was a misnagdim. I said, so what? Zalman Shimon Dvorkin mentions him in Psakim and says we should be chayshish for his opinion. In different Psakim, in different rulings. Zalman Shimon Dvorkin was the chief rabbi, so to say, of the Lubavitch Chassidim in Crown Heights until his passing. The whole attitude of, that just because they're not part of mine, or just because they said something against mine, therefore they lose any greatness or advantage is not a Chabad approach. It's wrong. And Moshe Mordechai, at least privately to me, he voiced all this frustration with what he sees. And of course, this, in Chabad we talk to Chabad, but the same thing can be said in every other sect for that sect to say. When one sect speaks bad against another sect, that causes machlekes. Introspection is meant to be done within the sect by the own people in the sect. So this comes from someone from the outside. It's a big mistake people do. People feel the liberty of calling out other sects of Judaism. This is that. The problem is when a person does that, they arouse the natzchanos, the midah of netzach, of opposition in that other sect, and they don't get anything done. They don't get anything done, and they just cause the issue to be more and more avoided. So these things have to be brought up. So therefore, in Chabad, we're saying what he said, that this is something that has to be worked on, and also from a PR perspective. So he was speaking about the PR perspective as well, saying that when people belittle other Talmidei Chachamim, other Gedolim, so it puts other people, there's nothing more that puts people off than that. And the Alte really said it in the letter. Say what the Alte writes in the letter. And so first of all, it's not true. The person does reserve respect for his Torah, even if he's not on your wavelength or in your sect. And number two is that it's something that definitely puts people down. So this is another one of his teachings that we can run with. And it's not only to run with for ourselves, but if we hear people speaking in a way of belittling, we have to protest. We have to protest. We shouldn't always be these lovely, nice Jews who never ever open our mouths to not hurt anyone's feelings. I'm sorry. If someone's going to say something wrong, not just wrong halachically, but something that can cause machlekes and sinas chinam and something that pushes someone away, a person has to protest. A person has to stand up and say, I'm sorry, this is wrong. This is you. A person may feel you're becoming more connected by you're showing you're a bigger chassid by putting down the misnais. No, you're not.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I was in Yerushalayim, living there in Romema, and I had a few roommates, I was invited for Shabbos to this family. I'd gone like a few times, and like the last time I had went, it's a big rabbi, and he's like a Belzer Hassid, and the wife is a Rebbitzin and very well known. And I have like the utmost respect for them when I got there. And then like in the middle of the meal, he was really putting down Chabad. He's like, oh yeah, Chabad, the Rebbe. He's like, I don't want to hear about the Rebbe. I don't want anything to do with the Rebbe. And I was just like in shock. And I was like, I really wanted to say something, and what stopped me was like, okay, what he's saying is completely wrong. He's a rabbi. Is it disrespect for me to say something? Because I'm just like a little young, whatever. And
listen.
And the Rebbitzin, I didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't know what to, but I was very upset when I heard that. I never went back there.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, this Magefa is, as the Rebbe would always say, just because someone has a long beard and has been appointed to a position or even knows a lot of Torah, doesn't mean he doesn't have his own Yitzhak.
So am I allowed to say something?
Listen, it depends. It depends on the situation. A person also, you have to do something that makes sense at the time. If you're a guest at someone's home, in most situations it's not appropriate or well accepted to But a person has the right to get up and leave, 100%. If something is a person has the right, even though it says you can listen to you have to listen to everything your Baal Bayis says except for leaving. If there's something that is, a person doesn't have to sit and be, in suffering by his host. He's, even though from the Alte Rebbe, he did stay by the Masnagid for 3 hours. So, on the level of the Alte Rebbe, you should stay and take abuse. But for most people, it's kind of difficult. And therefore, not always can we, especially, a person who views himself as you're saying, a big Rav, and, who are you? So, it's kind of hard to make a protest in such a situation. I was more talking about amongst friends, talking amongst each other, people overhearing, etc. But, it would be proper for a Belzer Rav to speak about what Belzer Chassidim need to fix and what Belzer Chassidim need to do. When you talk about other groups, what they need to do, it never really ends up well. Just spreads more machlekes and sinas chinam, and
it's ShulchanAruch.
Without doubt.
And that's a big sin in itself.
Okay, we're going to go into Purim Katan. So Purim Katan is, as we know, in a leap year. This year it is that we have a leap year. We have Purim Katan coming up Monday night, Tuesday, and Tuesday night, Wednesday. The term Purim Katan that I'm using, and which is commonly used today, as you will see, is doesn't really have a source in the Talmud or the Poskim. It's not called Purim Katan. It's just called Yud Daled Adar Rishon. But nonetheless, we call it the small Purim based on all of the different customs that we associate with Purim on this day, as we will learn. The Alte Rebbe in his Siddur does call it Purim Katan.
Oh, is it because it's a leap year that we have Purim Katan? We don't have it every year.
we only have it in a year with 2 others, as then we have the first other, and we want to do something also in the first other.
Okay, got it.
We don't want to leave it that the first other will be empty. Well, let's learn. So the Mishnah in Maseches Megillah says, page 6b, that there is no difference between the first Purim and the second Purim, between Purim and the first Adar and Purim and the second Adar, the 14th of the first, the 14th and the second Adar, with exception to reading the Megillah and matanis and presents. That's the only difference, it says. Ideally, there's a question in the Talmud. When should the actual date of Purim be commemorated and celebrated on in a 2 other year? The first one or the second one? And the answer is that the second one is always the main one. The first one is the addition. The second is in place of the original Adar. As well as we want to approximate the celebration of Passover to the celebration of Purim, the 2 miracles together. So we have it in the second. But nonetheless, even though that is the halacha, the Mishnah discusses, so how do we treat the Purim of the first Adar? So even though the Mishnah made this statement, we have a few different opinions in the Brisa. We have some people who say, whatever you do the first Adar, do the second Adar. So here Megillah, send Mishleach Manis, do everything you do the first, do the second as well. We have another approach who says, nothing. The first Adar is nothing, only the second Adar has any meaning. And then we have the Mishnah, which, as we said that the first Adar is, the wording is that there's no difference between the 14th on the first Adar, this Monday night, and the second one, except for 2 things: reading Megillah, which we don't read, and matanas and presents. But regarding everything else, it's similar. What does that mean? What's it coming to include? So, Mishloach Manis, it's not coming to include because that is a subcategory of the mitzvah. I'm sorry. Let's start with Al Nisim. Al Nisim, it doesn't include, we don't say Al Nisim and davening because that is a subcategory of reading the Megillah. Since we don't read the Megillah, we also don't say that in davening. So that's the Halacha. That's what's brought in ShulchanAruch. We do not say Al Nisim. If a person said it by mistake, he doesn't have to repeat Shemana Esrei, but we don't lechatchila say it in the prayers. Regarding Matanis Levianim, that it says explicitly we don't give. Regarding Mishloach Manis, so it's as follows. On the one hand, it says except for Matanis, which we can interpret to being Matanis Levianim and not Mishloach Manis. Especially being that Mishloach Manis is a offshoot of the mitzvah of Sudas Purim. According to many Rishonim, it's an offshoot of Sudas Purim, of the meal of Purim. Now, are we obligated to have a Purim meal on Purim Katan? So the Ran, Rebbe Nissim, one of the Rishonim, on his commentary on the Rif writes, yes, we are. As the Mishnah explicitly says, 2 things are excluded. Meal of Purim is not excluded. So he rules that you have to have a meal this coming Tuesday, just like you do on Purim, with friends and Hamantashin and whatever you usually do. Mashke, getting drunk, the whole 9 yards. I guess so. Everything. He says there's no difference. Says the Mishnah, there's no difference. It's the same. It's just like a real Purim regarding. Tachbosot. Some do. I know in the schools they're doing costumes for this Purim cotton. Right. What's been happening with Purim in actuality is that the whole year we wear costumes, we make believe we are who we are, and then on Purim we finally take it off. We drink and we take off the costume. That's why the Rama writes that if the person who you really are is not such a good person, then just don't drink, keep the costume on. That's what he writes, yeah. Rama writes in ShulchanAruch. Someone who's not going to act befittingly after he drinks, if the person's sight is not something very beneficial for him or for mankind, then don't keep the sight secret. Don't drink. Okay, but so this is an opinion. How do we rule? So the Machaber doesn't make any mention. The Machaber in the ShulchanAruch, it's actually the last chapter of ShulchanAruch is this subject. In Aruch Chaim, there's 4 sections of ShulchanAruch, Aruch Chaim, Yehuda, Nezer, Chesed, Mishpat. The first one, Aruch Chaim, has 697 chapters, and this is the last chapter, Purim Katan. That's the whole chapter, Purim Katan. What is Purim Katan? And there the Machaber rules the following: we do not say Tachanun on both days of Yudala Tesvav, as Alte writes in the Siddur, that it will include from Mincha of Monday, Mincha of Erev Purim, Starting Mincha Ve'erev Purim, we do not say Tachanun until Wednesday night. Okay, so Monday, Mincha, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday are all non-Tachanun days. Likewise, based on that, there are also days where we do not give eulogies, as I mentioned earlier. Both days, we do not give Hispedim on the 14th or the 15th. That's why there was a whole question regarding the Moshe Feinstein, and only because he was the Gadol Adar that it was a special heter given to give him a eulogy. Also, it's forbidden to fast on these days because, as a result of that. However, the Mechaber rules that regarding Megillah, Mishlach Manas, Matanas Lavyanim, not just what the Mishnah writes about Megillah, but even Mishlach Manas, it is not necessary. We don't have to do any of these mitzvahs on this day, and we don't say Alanisim. However, the Ramah writes, V'yesha, some say, which is the Ran, that there's a mitzvah or requirement to have a festive meal on this day, just like we do on a regular Purim. But then he writes, this is not the custom. I haven't seen people do it. People ignore Purim Katan. They pass it over without saying Tachanun, and that's it. They just don't say Tachanun, they don't give a Spaden, but it's a regular day of the week. The custom isn't to turn it into a merrymaking day. But he concludes that nonetheless, it is best for a person to increase in festive meals on the 14th of Adar Rishon to suspect for this opinion. So unlike the widespread custom in his times, he concludes that a person should increase, and then he ends the Shulchan Aruch with the famous words of King Solomon in Mishlei, Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, merrymaking is always good. It's always good to be happy. Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, a happy heart is always healthy. It's always a good thing. And the Mefarshim on the Shulchan Aruch, the great poskim who wrote the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, they pay attention to this concluding statement of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Ramah. What was he trying? Why did he recruit this pasuk, this verse from King Solomon? What was the purpose? So we have two conclusions recorded. One of the Taz in the Mishnah Brura, that the Ramah is hinting to us that remember the opinion I said earlier of the Ran that you're supposed to have the same level of feasting on Purim Katan as regular Purim, and then I told you the custom isn't to do so, so only increase rightly. Better to increase completely. Better to do a full-out meal. Better to do a full-out celebration and commemoration, just like a regular Purim. As Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, you can never lose out by having a Seudah Shel Mitzvah, a Seudah which its whole purpose of commemoration is for the miracles that Hashem has done for us. So this was a very Chassidish conclusion, a very Chassidic outlook, where, in previous times, a person had to choose Simcha or Atzvus or Marirus or bitterness. They would choose bitterness. As they say of one of the famous Litvish Gainim, a true story that he said that one of the hardest, hardest months that he has is the month of Purim. You have to increase in Simcha. There's a mitzvah to increase in Simcha. It's very hard. In any event, because everybody's very serious, everything's very serious. Back then, there was a whole style of fasting and beating your body. Until the Baal Shem Tov came, this was the style. This is what people's perspective of Vedas Hashem was. So Simcha, Simcha Mahi, where should I have Simcha knowing my poor state? What am I being happy about? Everything's terrible, with me. But nonetheless, so the Ramah here had a very Chassidic conclusion of where Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. Whenever we have a machlekes, if you should be happy or not be happy, better to be happy. Toiv Leiv Mishta. So that was the first conclusion. The second conclusion was that even on the 15th, a person should increase slightly, just like they do on Shushan Purim. And bottom line is as follows. Halacha l'maisa, we should heed to the words of the Ramah, and therefore we should make sure to have an increasing of a celebratory meal on Purim Katan. You don't have to get drunk, that's a different story, but at least to increase in festivities, and each to their own, but it shouldn't be just another day of the calendar. It should be viewed as a real day of celebration, commemoration, as we said, similar to the original Purim, which we will celebrate in a month's time. Yeah. A little louder.
If a person died in the regular which month?
So we discussed that one who passed away in an other Shana Pshuta with only one other, then a yard site as opposed to a birthday is commemorated in the first other. This other.
In the
first.
Even if it was a regular year.
If it was a regular year, then they commemorate the passing in the first, yes. Sephardim do the second, Ashkenazim do the first. So if you're Sephardi, you would do the second. If you're Ashkenazi, you do the first. Bottom line is that we are stringent to do both. The main for Ashkenazim is the first, this other, but it's also a stringency to do the second one. Back in the day, when we said stringency, it was fasting. People would fast on the day of their parents' yahrzeit. Today, we don't fast. So what's the stringency? You have an extra l'chaim, you say a little more tehillim, a little more tov, give a little more tzedakah. It's a good thing to do that every day of the year. So if you do it twice, for the yahrzeit, it's not such a big deal. Light a candle, etc. Tainus Esther. All right. Wow. Which date was it? It was Yud Gimel. Because not always Tainus Esther is Yud Gimel. Sometimes Tainus Esther falls on Shabbos, so it's pushed off before, and like this year. Okay. If they're Ashkenazi, you're Ashkenazi? Okay. Yeah, that's what's done. Okay, we will now begin we finished the previous book, which was Awakening Like a Jew, and we're moving on to the next section in Shulchan Aruch that we're up to, relating, of course, to women, and that is the laws of tzitzis and tefillin. For our perspective, we're going to do both of them together, because obviously you're not obligated in tzitzis and tefillin, so we don't have to go through all 300 pages of this book. It's a great book to have, though. First of all, it's a beautiful picture, as you see. And also the content. There's a lot of interesting information for your husbands and for your children. But there's certain things that we need to go through that are pertinent even to women. For example, first we're going to delve into why is it that in truth women do not wear tefillin or tzitzis. What is the legal source for the exemption? Something we discussed in the past already in our opening class on the subject of women and mitzvahs and what they're exempt from. So we're going to go more into that now. These are really our source material in the Shulchan Aruch of women that being exempted from mitzvahs is in tzitzis and tefillin. We're going to go into, are they allowed to be machmer amongst themselves, some history of women throughout history that have been stringent to wear talis and tefillin, and who were they and why did they do so, and how was this accepted amongst the sages. We'll likewise go into different things that may be relevant, more regarding tzitzis than tefillin, of home care, such as knowing when your son's tzitzis are pasul. If the husband is never the one washing the tzitzis and he's never taking a look at the tzitzis of his son, so the wife, the mother, has to know, when are my son's tzitzis no good? When are they obsolete, pasul, they have to be changed? Or if there's a tear in the tzitzis. So we're going to go through different, or can women make tzitzis? If you are offered a job for making tzitzis, can you take the job? Is a woman kosher for making tzitzis? Or forget about making tzitzis. What about working in a factory that manufactures the thread? You're not tying the tzitzis to the beged. You have a great paying job. You're a professional seamstress, and they heard about your thread winding, and they want to offer you $50 an hour, the price you can't refuse, right? Here in Israel, $50 an hour. And you make your tzitzis, and you'll send them just the tzitzis. They'll tie it. They'll get a guy to tie it. Can you do that? Are women kosher? What do you women think? Are women kosher to make the tzitzis threads?
Hopefully, I did it once.
Yeah.
Here in Spot.
Really?
I was at the gallery, the Canaan Gallery, like 10 years ago, and I sat on the booth. I remember I did it.
And they were going to use that for actual tzitzis later on?
Yeah. But I don't know. I didn't know. It wasn't religious at the time, so I want to hear what you say.
Well, we're going to get up to that soon. On the subject, we'll get to that. I don't want to spoil it already now. We'll get to the subject of women, but I'll already mention regarding goyim. Goyim are not valid for making the tzitzis strings, for making the strings. And I remind myself of a story that happened here in Israel, and I believe it was the late 80s. Basically, as we know, that any market of product, there's always the forgers, okay? In every market there are forgers. especially a market which isn't well regulated, well supervised, and the Wild West is what reigns. So this is, whenever there's a product that consumers want that can be taken advantage of by the sellers, it will be. You don't have to be chayshish anyone valid or puzzle products, or we have to be very vigilant in hashgacha, in knowing what we get. In any event, okay, so with that said, there is an official law here in Israel which prohibits businesses from being open on Shabbos, unless they receive a special allowance from the Misrad Apnim, from the Minister of the Interior. He has to give a special allowance, I believe it was Minister of Interior, to allow people to work on Shabbos, let's say, I don't know, military or whatever it is. So the Yaakov Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yosef at that time, was a member of the Knesset, and he wanted to review all the different mifalim, factories that had this allowance given to them to be open on Shabbos. And he goes through the list. So first they didn't want to give him the list. They refused to give him the list, and he had to bribe one of the, as he says, that's the way Medinat Yisrael works. He says that's the way Hamatefan. The newcomers don't know it yet, but that's what he says. That's what everyone knows. That's how it works. You had to slip a little envelope in order to get the list from someone in the Ministry of Interior. They gave him the list of all the different mifalim, and he was going through the list, and he saw that there was a factory which was under the Rabbanut Hashgacha with a stamp of the Rabbanut. Then you manufactured tzitzis, and this is very strange. They're manufacturing tzitzis on Shabbos, so he calls the owner or the manager of the mifal, which is in an Arab. It's in Jenin. It's in an Arab town, an Arab settlement here in Israel. And he calls the manager and he tells him, "Do you guys have hashgacha from the Rabbi?" He says, "Yes, of course. We have this stamp." And he says, "Does a mashgiach come?" He says, "Yes. We arrange for him security. He comes every single day to the factory." I'm like, "And do you guys work on Shabbos?" He says, "We work on Shabbos, but we receive a special allowance from the Ministry of Interior to be open on Shabbos." I'm like, well, "So you're saying you have Jews making tzitzis on Shabbos?" He says, "No, don't worry, Rabbi. It's all Arab workers. All Arab workers." So he said, "Not only are your tzitzis puzzle on Shabbos, the puzzle the whole week. You're having Arab workers making the tzitzis."
Making the strings?
Making the strings, yeah, the strings.
Not in end tying also.
The tying, okay, the tying is something else. They would just sell the strings. They would produce the strings.
Wow.
So when he spoke to the Rabbanut, it basically fell through a crack in the Rabbanut. At first, the Rabbanut, of course, they made sure, the Mashgiach made sure that there was only Jewish workers. And then once they got the heter for the Ministry of Interior, the Rabbanut wasn't notified. There's a lot of things that go on under the belt. And so everything continued. The Mashgiach, not all Mashgiachim are very well versed in everything. So he said, listen, they found cheap labor. They have Arab labor. They work on Shabbos. So they're going to work during the week instead as well. And this is how this story came out. Okay. So let's begin with tzitzis, and then we'll go to tefillin regarding the obligation. So it's recorded in the Gemara in Menachos, Tractate Menachos, and in the ShulchanAruch chapter 17, that women are exempt from the mitzvah of tzitzis. So even if, so let's first categorize what is the mitzvah of tzitzis, so that they are exempt from. The mitzvah of tzitzis that a man is obligated in is as follows. If you happen to decide to wear a four-cornered garment, then you must tie strings in accordance to Halacha onto that garment, onto the four corners before you wear it. But if you don't feel like wearing a four-cornered garment, you have no tzitzis obligation. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is not to put on a talis katan. The mitzvah is, if you happen to be wearing a four-cornered garment, put on tzitzis. Back in the day, almost all the garments were four-cornered. For whatever reason, maybe style reasons, I don't know why. But this was, so back then people had tzitzis on, men had tzitzis on all their garments. They had their tzitzis on their undershirts, they had tzitzis on their pants, they had tzitzis everywhere. A lot of them were jalabiyas, so they had tzitzis on the jalabiyas, similar to today's kapata, like a robe, but it had a split, so it had four corners. Tzitzis was worn everywhere, because everywhere had four-cornered garments. They didn't do it for the sake of the mitzvah, because you cannot wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzis. Women are not obligated in this, so they can wear a four-cornered garment, even if it does not have tzitzis on it. What's the reason why? Why are women exempt? So the Alte writes like this. as the mitzvah of tzitzis is a time-dependent positive command. This is the first time in Shulchan Aruch that we come face to face with the idea of a mitzvah esesh as man grama, of a time-dependent command, of which women are exempt. So being that this is the first time, the Alte Rebbe has to build the case for why, meaning what is the halachic source? Why, spiritually, we already discussed in our first introductory class. Here we're just going more into the legal source of it, that where do we learn from the Torah, that they are legally exempt from time-dependent commands. So first, how is tzitzis a time-dependent command? Let's first, before we get to, because according to the opinion of the Rambam, you have no obligation to tie tzitzis to a four-cornered garment at night. Only by day is there a chiyuv for there to be tzitzis. As it says, Uri Isa Maisai. When is there an obligation to have the strings, the threads on your garment? During daytime, when you can see it and remember the mitzvahs. But at nighttime that it's dark and anyways you can't see, there's no obligation. So according to the Rambam, there is no requirement to have tzitzis on your garment at night. If so, the mitzvah is only in place, in force, when it's daytime, thus creating it and turning it into a time-dependent command. Likewise, we find the Poskim write that Shabbos, a four-corner garment, is exempt from tzitzis on Shabbos. Why? Biblically. Because you can't tie tzitzis on Shabbos. It's a biblical prohibition. So if you can't tie it on Shabbos, obviously there's no biblical command to go ahead and tie it. So biblically, there's no problem wearing a four-corner garment on Shabbos without tzitzis. Halachically, we don't rule this way. Of course, rabbinically, it's forbidden. But biblically, it is permitted. So this creates it into a time-dependent command. Just to go back a little bit to the history, as we're saying, the whole purpose of it was to remember the mitzvahs. So at night you can't see, so you won't remember, so there's no mitzvah. It's brought in the Medrash, a little bit of the historical background of the mitzvah of tzitzis, how it came about. I believe we mentioned a few times that unlike the misconception, the 613 commands of our Torah were not given all in one shot in one day by Har Sinai. Har Sinai, we had the 10 Commandments, in which included in a secretive, mystical manner all the 613 commands. But we never received an explicit instruction of all 6,000 tzitzis. We had no clue about this mitzvah yet. The mitzvah of tzitzis was only discovered many years later. When? Anyone know when? After the story of the Meraglim. Yes, after the story of the Meraglim, that's true as well. But after the story of no, not Kairach. It was after the story of Mekashish Be'etzim, which we attribute to being the Tzlafchad, okay, which was after the story of the Meraglim. So we had the story of the Meraglim, we then had the story, this is in Parsha Shlach, of the Tzlafchad, or whoever that man was, right? The individual known as Mekashish Be'etzim was seen gathering, that we all agree. And he was put to death for doing so. So right after that story is said in Parsha Shlach, it then goes straight to the mitzvah of tzitzis. And the question is, how did that get here? Where did that come from? And the Mefarshim, the Medrash says that the story was as follows. The Jewish people, right, it says that Tzlafchad he was a righteous Jew. He actually did this for a reason. He wanted to show everyone that even after the story of the Meraglim and the punishment or the result where they will have to stay in the desert now for 40 years, the mitzvahs that they were commanded are still complained. They have a rightful complaint. You didn't give them anything to remind them of the mitzvahs on Shabbos. So Hashem said, okay, I'll give them the mitzvah of tzitzis, and the tzitzis that they wear on Shabbos and throughout the entire week will remind them of the mitzvahs. That is the history of this mitzvah. So if so, why don't women need this reminder? Why do women not have it? So it doesn't discuss it there. But for whatever reason, God saw it that these two mitzvahs of tefillin and tzitzis of reminders of the Torah are more necessary for men. I'll leave the rest for your own speculation of why, but this is at least what it comes out from these sources. So going back, okay, so we established that it's a time-dependent command. Why are women exempt from time-dependent commands? So the Rebbe continues and says like this. It says regarding tefillin, the mitzvah of tefillin, L'mantia teres Hashem b'ficha. I am commanding you the mitzvah of tefillin in order so the words of the Torah be on your lips, be on your mouth, which teaches us that the entire Torah is connected to tefillin. And just like women are exempt from learning Torah, so too, just as women are exempt from tefillin, just as women are exempt from tefillin, so they're exempt from tzitzis. In other words, the way the Alte teaches is like this: women are exempt from tefillin. That we know. How? We'll get to that soon. But that we know. And since all the Torah is connected to tefillin, we therefore bridge that teaching that women are exempt from tefillin to all mitzvahs that are similar to tefillin, which are time dependent. So this is how we based on this drasha. They're exempt from tefillin. Tefillin has a hekesh connected to all the other mitzvahs. It says man tiyah Hashem b'ficha. So therefore we learn from tefillin, just like that's a time dependent command. The women are exempt, so they're exempt from all time dependent commands. The one problem with this is that tefillin. Why are women exempt from tefillin? The answer that Alte gives in another chapter 38 is because tefillin is a time dependent command. So it's a never-ending cycle. So the truth is that there's another source for why women are exempt from tefillin, and Yerushalmi, and that is because tefillin are connected to learning Torah. And since we learn from the verse with Dibarta Bam, it's going on men, that women are exempt from Torah learning. We discussed this last week, right? To what extent women are exempt. They are obligated Torah learning for their subjects, but in other subjects they're exempt, so too they're exempt from tefillin. And since they're exempt from tefillin, therefore we learn the concept of time-dependent command exemptions for the rest of the Torah. So that's really the source. So if anyone ever asks you, what is the legal, I know the reasons we discussed of husband fulfills the mitzvah, says the Arizal, women are busy with the families, different reasons we already discussed, that are explained al pi drush. But the halachic and legal understanding of it is based on the exemption from Torah learning, to teach the exempt from tefillin, to teach the whole Torah.
How does tefillin and learning to work connected?
They're in the same parsha. The parsha of the Dibarta Bam B'Shivtach V'Visech L'Chavdech talks about Ukshartam Leis Al Yadech and Shema. The same parsha that discusses the mitzvah. There's a whole bunch of mitzvahs written in Shema. They have the mitzvah of, we can also think about this to fulfill them in davening. To realize that davening, when we say Shema, we're fulfilling a ton of commands. Even women, we're fulfilling a ton of commands. Achtas Hashem and Shema Yisrael. It's a biblical command upon every Jew, man and woman. That's in Shema. We then fulfill the mitzvah of ve'ahavta, of loving God when we say ve'ahavta, if we work on it and have the feeling. Just to have lip service is not really saying fulfilling ve'ahavta. And then it discusses about learning Torah, and then it discusses about tefillin, it discusses about mezuzah. There's a whole bunch of mitzvahs discussed there. So they're connected. Tzitzis, of course, is in the third parsha, in Vayemer. Okay, so now that we've established why legally women are exempt, may they nonetheless choose to do so. Is a woman allowed to choose? Well, I understand I'm exempt, but I choose. I would like to wear a talis. I think it's very warm and comfortable, and I like the look of it. And I really looked into this mitzvah. I read this book, and I was so fascinated by the mitzvah of tzitzis. I want to do it. I want to try it. Can she do so? So this already is our first. In general, the ruling is as follows. Being commanded in something means that God is telling you, you have to do this. Not doing this is rebellion. Not doing this is transgressing a positive command of the Torah. And we will have a talk one day after 120 about what's going on. That's a command. Okay? If it's not a command, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to do it. If you weren't commanded, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to do it. It just means you're not obligated to do it. So we're not going to ask any woman, why didn't you go ahead and put on tefillin? Why didn't you go ahead and wear tzitzis? Why didn't you go ahead and do eat in the sukkah? Because they're not obligated to do so. Even though they're not obligated to do so, they have the right to do so if they so choose. We find this even, and not because that, okay, it's as if they're not doing anything. Well, it doesn't say in the Torah there's an isser for a woman to wear tzitzis, so therefore she's allowed to do it. Just like there's no isser for someone to juggle blocks, okay? You want to juggle balls, you can juggle it. There's no isser in the Torah to do so. So there's no isser for a woman to put on tzitzis if she wants to, or if there's no isser for a woman to do anything that she's exempt from. While that is correct that the Torah doesn't ask it, it's even furthermore we find that all those things that a person isn't commanded in, the mitzvahs that a woman is exempt from, or even a Gentile. Of course, he only has to do the 7 Noahide laws. He's not commanded in the 613. If he chooses to do them, he receives a reward. So there's reward given for fulfilling mitzvahs, even if you're exempt from them, because it's still a mitzvah. It's just you're not commanded in the mitzvah. But the status of mitzvah still applies, and therefore reward is given. The Rambam writes is regarding a guy, that a guy is allowed to fulfill all the mitzvahs from the Torah if it feels like it, even before conversion. In fact, he tells you, I will never convert, I don't want to convert. I want to remain a 7 Noahide Jew, 7 Noahide Gentile, but I want to try the mitzvahs once in a while. I want to one day do the mezuzah, I want to one day put on tzitzis, I want to one day do tefillin, I want to one day do shiluach hakein, give tzedakah. He's allowed to do all the mitzvahs in the Torah for the sake of schar, except for keeping Shabbos, and the Rabbi writes also except for tefillin because of the kedusha of the tefillin. But everything else, minadin, he could. Now, I just want to mention, we don't actually, it's forbidden to sell a guy a pair of tzitzis, not because they're not allowed to wear tzitzis, but because you may mistake him for a Jew, and that can cause terrorist attacks, etc. We discussed this in the past. So that's a separate issue. It's not because they are forbidden from doing that mitzvah, it's because to protect us, we don't sell them tefillin, tzitzis. But otherwise, there is no, a guy has the right, other than learning Torah and putting on, and as I said, the Rabbis, putting on tefillin and keeping Shabbos, they are allowed to do any of the other mitzvahs. And the Rambam adds, and they receive reward for it, as they too have a chelik ha'nelam haba. And the same idea is emphasized regarding women, that women as well, they are allowed to do all the commands that they are exempt from and receive reward from doing so. Let's get inside in the wording. Alte continues, however, minadin, from the letter of the law, even though they're exempt, and they are allowed to wear a 4-cornered garment without tzitzis, and he explains that the reason is because it's permitted for even women to wear tzitzis and recite a blessing if they so choose, just as they are accustomed to perform other time-dependent positive commands. And they may even recite the bracha of the tzivanu l'satif b'tzitzis, despite the fact that in truth they have not been commanded in this mitzvah. The reason for this is because men are commanded this mitzvah when a woman performs a command that she is exempt from fulfilling. Although she's not rewarded as much as one who's commanded, nevertheless she does receive some reward. For this reason, they are permitted to even recite a bracha over all mitzvahs. So this idea, if it was just like juggling blocks, like doing something mundane, then how can you say a bracha on it? Do I say a bracha because I decided that juggling blocks is service of God? Of course not. But since this is a mitzvah, its mitzvah status is even for a woman, it's just not an obligatory status for a woman, therefore they are even allowed to say Asher Kadishanu upon wearing it. We've discussed this many times, that this psak is indeed a great debate amongst poskim. Not everyone takes this approach. The approach the Alte here is saying is the approach of the Ramon the Ashkenazim. The Mechaber famously took a different approach, saying women may not say a blessing on time-dependent commands that they choose to do, even though they get reward. He doesn't argue on that, but he said a blessing, that's too much. You cannot say the bracha. Even amongst the Sfaradim, we've already mentioned that the Chidah rules that based on the Shutmin Hashemayim, which was, answers from heaven. We discussed the Sefer a few times. He would write down questions before he went to sleep under his pillow and wake up with answers. So based on the answer he got on this matter, that it says that heaven responded, God responded, that woman may recite a bracha upon the time-dependent commands, the Chidah writes that if the Mechaber would have known about this, he would have changed his ruling in the ShulchanAruch. So because of that, amongst many of the Sfaradim, especially old-school Sfaradim, they too recite blessings on time-dependent commands, just like men, just like Ashkenazi women. A lot of those who follow Rav Yosef's rulings will not say a blessing on a time-dependent command if they are a woman. However, as I said before, many Sfaradim do so. The Ben Ish Chai rules to do so. The Kaf Chaim rules to do so. So there's a lot of big Sephardi poskim who take the approach that we're all on the same boat here. You can say a bracha on time-dependent commands, as men are obligated, and the mitzvah and schar apply likewise to a woman. Nonetheless, at the same time, as we keep on emphasizing, there's no isser for a woman to wear. Like, where is he going with this? We all know there's a movement down from someone quoting the Shulchan Aruch, but it really doesn't matter what I'm quoting from, because always the messenger gets the blame, saying that women can wear tzitzis. What is this? So then there's a conclusion, and I like telling this to everybody. Don't only quote what feeds your position. Quote the whole thing, uncovered in the end, and you look like a fraudster. So all the people that try to recruit different sayings and positions to prove their point with knowingly or unknowingly excluding other said. The Alte Rebbe then concludes, nevertheless, even though general, this is our in the ShulchanAruch. This is our first face with a mitzvah which is time dependent. And woman, so the Alte is going into all the details here for the general perspective on time dependent command mitzvahs. The general perspective of women can still choose to do it and get schar. General perspective, they can even say a bracha on it because they're allowed because the schar involved and it's still a mitzvah. But in this specific case of tzitzis, concludes the Alte Rebbe based on the Rishonim, a woman is not to do so. It's not forbidden. We're not going to use the word forbidden, asr min hadin, meaning that the sages prohibited it in the times of the Talmud, but practically she is not to do so. What's the reason why? So the reason here that's brought down in the Rishonim, the Ramon, the Alte Rebbe, is because since the mitzvah of tzitzis only applies when you wear a four-cornered garment, and even men don't have to put on a four-cornered garment, so this type of command is not similar to lulav and, let's say, shofar, which women not only do they do, but they actually took it upon themselves, and it's an obligation to do. Today, it's an obligation for women to hear shofar, even though it's did this as a custom upon themselves, turning it into a vow. So it's not because of laws of shofar, but it's because of laws of vows that they have to listen to shofar. So too with lulav. It's not because of the laws of lulav they have to shake lulav in sukkahs, but because of the laws of vows that they took it upon themselves. But but they didn't do this with all the mitzvahs. Regarding tzitzis, they did not do it, and not only did not do it, but we say that they shouldn't do it because tzitzis is unlike shofar and lulav. It's an obligation on the individual. That you have an obligation to hear shofar on Rosh Hashanah. You have an obligation to shake lulav and sukkahs. But tzitzis is not an obligation on the individual, but on the garment. And when you happen to be wearing this garment. So this is the it's mainly something that's done as an extra act of scrupulousness today. If the men do it, we're not chayiv to wear the tzitzis. We don't have to wear it. This is also we're not din. It's because we specifically put it on in order to be zoich in the mitzvah. So since even for us it's not a actual obligation, so therefore the wording there would be yuha would be above and beyond the level that the Torah is asking women to be on for her to put it on herself. What this means is as follows. We find a lot of times in Halacha the concept called yuhara, which means, literally translating as arrogance. What that means is as follows, that a person has to do the basics and focus on the basics, and not, a lot of times we have a Yetzer Hara that wants us to grab the chumras and the basics remain untouched, undone. And so it says that there's a ladder. You can't grab on, like you can't start putting on Rabbeinu tefillin, but don't jump to Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, like don't start with davening late and then daven ba'aved. First daven ba'aved, and then you can start davening late, but don't do the opposite where you change around the priorities of what the chumrah is. So because of this, basically there was a gradation given that not all chumras you can decide to upon yourself, also for men. And this was a type of chumrah that was viewed that for women something that the sages did not want and take upon themselves, as it was viewed more something of a what's demanded of them of their basic duties. This would be above and beyond that. So this was called yuhara. Furthermore, we have poskim who hold that because of this, that women do not wear. Now it became prohibited to the beged ish. It's forbidden for a woman to wear the garment of a man. Now, even though, as we said from the letter of the law, there's no prohibition for a woman to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis, and on the contrary, she gets schar for doing so. Nonetheless, if it's become designated for only men to do, if a woman wears it, can be considered that she's wearing the garment of a man, which is forbidden. This isn't very simple. Bottom line is that if she's doing it for the mitzvah, not to look like a man, she doesn't transgress cross-dressing. The issur of cross-dressing is only when you do it to look like the opposite gender. But if I'm doing it to fulfill the mitzvah of Hashem, then it is not a problem. Nonetheless, even though this is the wording of the Alte Rebbe, the later Achreinim take a much more severe wording, and they all write that it is forbidden for a woman to try to be machmer on herself and wear tzitzis, and that is the directive given today. Next week in Mitzvah we'll go into different background and history and stories of different people who did and what was the reaction. We'll do that next week, but this is the general approach today. I'll conclude with a story with the say of the Brisker Rav, that once in the start of the feminist movement and women wanting to and the reform movement of women wanting to take upon themselves more mitzvahs. Usually not the mitzvahs that they're obligated in, but the additional ones. As I said, I'll choose to daven late. The Veda and davening, that's something else, but the daven late I'll do. So a woman went over to him and asked him, she wants to start doing the mitzvah of putting on a talus, wearing a talus. or wearing a talis katan, one of the two. So he told her very connivingly, he told her like this. He told her, with all mitzvahs you need training. It takes time to get into it. You can just start right away with the kedusha. It's too much, too many ayers, too much light. So he says, first I'll give you a talis katan. You wear the talis katan without tzitzis. Wear it for 2 weeks and come back to me in 2 weeks and tell me how it is. So she wears the talis katan without tzitzis for 2 weeks. He comes back to the brisker Rebbe and says, no, I'm ready. It was unbelievable, the most amazing experience I've had. And he says, fool, do you understand that when you wear a talis katan without tzitzis, you're transgressing a prohibition? So if you're taking this upon yourself and you feel that you're making believe you feel automatic feelings when you're doing the mitzvah, you didn't have tzitzis on your talis katan. So this is one case. Okay, Mitzvah next week we'll go more into this.
Shiva continues even though Purim Katan.
What's that?
Purim Katan is not something that ends